Hello, this is Elsa with Tim Burton. Recently, things turned out in a way he didn't expect at all, with a very expensive lawyer.
My barrister, her very opening statement was, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, some of you may not like Mr. Burton's politics. And I'm like, what? Some of you, she says, may not like the things that Mr. Burton has to say. And I thought, I don't believe I'm hearing this.
He ended up convicted by a judge who is saying that when he sentences, it's likely to be prison. And that could be up to 2 years in prison in a British jail. Most recently, someone who was sentenced for, putting I think pork to a mosque or something, ended up dead after a few months under quote unquote mysterious circumstances. I don't remember exactly what he did, but I remember he ended up dead. So right now, I want to talk to Tim about what happened to him, where he's at now, and especially his appeal. So good morning, Tim, and thank you for coming on.
Good morning, Elsa. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So what I want to know is, yesterday I spoke with you about the possibility of an appeal, because what I would like to do is, if possible, raise funds so that your appeal is funded, because I believe you've utterly drained your nest egg in terms of paying for a very expensive lawyer who defended you very, very badly in a way that you never would have done.
Yes, well, that is about the size of it. I've I've analysed the circumstances very very deeply over the past 10 or 12 days, and I certainly think I was shortchanged. And obviously, we can go into details at an appropriate point. But yeah, I went into court fully expecting to win on the same grounds that I won a similar court case back in 2014. But it turned out extremely different, and consequently, I'm left in quite a difficult position where I've got to try and rectify the situation and hopefully push through a successful appeal. And in the meantime, I've got to make sure I can stay alive. Only a few months ago, was a chap called Kevin Crean, and as you say, I think he was convicted for throwing pork into a mosque, something along those lines, and the judge took a very serious view of it. He was sentenced to a period in prison. I don't know how long that was, but within a couple of months, he was found dead in his cell. And the problem, as we know, is that British prisons in particular, I suppose this might be true in many countries, but British prisons are run by Muslim gangs. And if they find that you've got a problem with Islam, then you're going to have a very hard time in prison, without a doubt. So yeah, it's certainly something I need to consider. I feel, well, let's just say I feel a little bit trepidatious that I might end up in a similar position, but yeah, it's a difficult environment if you are like me, anti-Islam, and you're in a place where you can't walk away from problems that might come up to you. So yeah, it's quite worrying, you might say. Yes.
I remember that Tommy Robinson, when he was sent to prison the first time for 6 months for lying on his brother's mortgage application. Again, another judge who really had it in for him. But anyway, he asked for, over and over, solitary confinement, and he spent 5 of his 6 months in solitary confinement, which is likely why he survived. But anyway, so I don't want you to go to prison. I want you to win the appeal.
That's two of us.
And a third thing, I would really love it, because what happened with Tommy, there ended up being enough people who cared. I have a question for you. Yesterday, you said you were looking into, can you appeal? What are your grounds? Have you gotten more information on that?
Yes, I have. I've spoken to my solicitor, and I've said I think we have grounds for appeal. I told him about the fact that we didn't have full disclosure of things that we asked for before the trial. One of the things we asked for was complete disclosure of all the communications between Fiaz Magal and Tel Mama and the Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service. And the reason we asked for this is that Fiaz Magal actually sits on a panel that advises the Crown Prosecution Service. And here he is acting as a complainant in this trial, when his brief is to instruct the Crown Prosecution Service how to prosecute cases of so-called Islamophobia. So I think there's a very clear conflict of interest, and I wanted to delve into that. And what should have happened was the prosecution should have disclosed everything in line with the defence request before the trial. Now that didn't happen, and I feel that I was severely disadvantaged as a result, and consequently that's one of the grounds for appeal. It's not the only grounds for appeal. We also have a question of whether the judge in his summing up gave enough weight to ECHR case law, which is European Commission on Human Rights. There is case law concerning free speech, and there's quite extensive case law, and basically free speech is supposed to be a treasured possession for Western democracies. And the judge only briefly referred to the concept of free speech when he was summing up to the jury. He basically said to the jury, there is such a concept as free speech. You may feel that the defence is entitled to put it forward as in mitigation. It is a consideration for you, and that's all he said about it. He didn't elaborate on how important free speech is to a democracy in the slightest. It was almost as if it wasn't relevant at all. So that's a second ground that we consider is when I say we're considering grounds for appeal, it has to go like this. First of all, we have to submit a form to the court to see if they agree with us that we have grounds for appeal. Now that's going to take at least a month, I would think, for that to happen. Then if they come back and say, yes, you've got grounds for appeal, then they have to set a date and have the appeal heard. And then at that time, you would hope that a judge would look at all the evidence and say, yeah, this is the trial, the original trial was severely flawed because of what the defence are now saying, and therefore we are either going to overturn the verdict or we're going to order a retrial. That would be an ideal outcome, but unfortunately none of these things are going to happen before my sentencing date, which is the end of the month. So I'm just going to have to be a little bit careful, obviously, with what I...
You mean you cannot put the appeal in before the end of the month? There's no way of doing this?
You can submit the claim for an appeal,
but you have to go to prison anyhow. I thought, well,
yeah.
You don't, an appeal doesn't stop things.
No, an appeal doesn't stop things dead. Absolutely, it doesn't. You can say on the form that you've got grounds for appeal, and you can list all the grounds for appeal, and then a court has to consider that. But these people do not operate on a dime, as I think the phrase is. They take their time and they schedule things in, and the court proceedings are very much at the convenience of the court. They're not for the convenience of a defendant who's been convicted.
So you might serve your entire sentence before the appeal got heard.
Well, I think the entire sentence is perhaps a little unlikely, but it's certainly possible that I'll have to serve some time before the appeal is heard. And I do know of other people to whom that's happened, where they have gone to prison. The appeal has been pending, but they've had to serve 1, 2, 3 months in prison before the appeal was heard and the verdict was overturned. And of course, if the verdict doesn't get overturned and the judges decide that there are no grounds for or the appeal is dismissed, then you have to serve your full sentence. But it's not an ideal situation by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay. this is the best possible thing then that we do an appeal, or that you do the appeal, and that people help with funding that appeal because everything costs and it's been really draining. And then one thing I've noticed about you is that you tend to have, not right now, a sense of humor. For example, one of your handles names is Cat Strangler, and yet you love cats. How did you get a name like Cat Strangler? Oh, you told me you took violin lessons and your mother said you sound like you're strangling the cat. So instead of, so you ran with it. With Tell Mama, your sense of humor kicked in again. Now, I don't know if you can say it briefly or better than me, but Tell Mama is supposed to look for cases of Islamophobia. They have rigged the figures and faked the figures. I don't know if I'm saying that quite right. I read it, but it kind of went in and out. But they've been convicted of fraud, etc. The first time I believe that you got, they took you to court because you called them mendacious tequila artists, and while you were allowed to call them mendacious scumbags, that was fine. There's no problem with that. The word tequila artist might have been religious harassment and only applicable to Shias and not Sunnis, etc., that kind of thing. Anyhow, you got off because they didn't know what mendacious was, which is lying, which they had been convicted of. This time, so again, the term tequila artist is sense of humor, it's light. This time, what you lightly did, because Tell Mama got its funding cut and then now reinstated, which if I were you would not make me happy. And so the way you expressed your unhappiness is when they took this money and they applied for a job. They, posted for looking for people to work and hunt out Islamophobia. You put in a job application.
Well, it seemed like the logical thing to do. I had been following Tell Mama ever since the 2014 case. And as you say, in the 2014 case, I was accused of using the phrase mendacious grievance-mongering tequila artist to describe Fiaz Magal, who is the founder of Tell Mama. He didn't like it. He got the police and the Crown Prosecution Service to bring a case. I won the case, and Fiaz Magal has been very bitter ever since. And I've been watching his progress. And as you say, he had his funding withdrawn because there was some substance to the allegations that were made back in June 2013. But then a year later, the funding was mysteriously restarted again. And it's almost as if the fraud and wrongdoing that he was accused of never happened. And he's never been able to shake off these accusations of fraud and wrongdoing. He's tried to sue various people to get the articles retracted. He tried to sue the reporter. He's tried to sue the Daily Telegraph newspaper, which is a mainstream newspaper over here. He tried to get the Independent Press Complaints Commission to investigate the paper, and they all came back and said, well, no, there's just no way that's going to happen, because basically what you did is what was reported in the press. So as far as I'm concerned, he's never been able to shake off those allegations. And so when I saw the advertisement for a caseworker, my first thought was, Tell Mama is doing quite enough damage manufacturing cases of so-called Islamophobia without another caseworker to help them, because in the meantime they had been literally manufacturing cases which were then investigated and thrown out because they were found to be untrue. This happened on more than one occasion. On one occasion, it was in Birmingham. A woman was alleged to have had her hijab ripped off by some sort of right-wing Islamophobe. It never happened. When the police investigated it, there was nothing in the CCTV in the streets to support such an allegation at all. And so but it didn't stop Tell Mama from posting the incident on their website for quite some time afterwards and and saying, well, this is the kind of thing that we are campaigning against. So when this caseworker job came up, I thought, yeah, they're doing quite enough damage. That was my first thought. My second thought was, having read through the list of qualifications required, I could do that job. all right, my Arabic is a bit rusty. I did spend some time in the Middle East when I was younger, and I picked up a few words of Arabic. Most of them unrepeatable on a family show like this. But nevertheless, I thought, yeah, I could do that job, and so I put in a jokey job application. You might say, yeah, that's maybe not the cleverest thing to do, but I didn't see any harm in it. And basically, I said, you need to look at me. I'm obviously the right person for the job. I've got extensive experience of working in the Middle East. All right, not as a social worker or anything like that, but as a geologist. But anyway, I really laid it on quite thick, and I said, please consider my job application. And then at the end of it, I put like a PS saying, actually, you probably don't want me in your organisation, because people who know me say that I'm generally honest and trustworthy, and as such, I would probably not fit in with a bunch of mendacious grievance-mongering takia artists like yourselves. And I sent it off. And it all it all developed from there. But yeah, that's how it happened.
Not much of a sense of humor in that bunch. But also, more than that, I think they were looking for something to nail you with, and they did, and they have. There have been more things in that you picked that what you thought was a top lawyer you met, liked. That your case got passed to another top lawyer, or you call them barristers or notaries. I don't care the term.
Yeah. Well,
another one, and then at the last minute, it was passed to someone who was supposed to be good.
Yeah.
Whom you did not have a chance to talk with.
Yeah.
And who, at a cost of, may I give the cost?
No, you're looking about £12,000 here.
Okay, £3,000 a day.
Yeah.
She did not take the time to prepare, to know the case, and she started, instead of presenting you positively, saying to the jury, you may find some of what this person has said offensive. Well,
yes.
As opposed to saying freedom of speech entitles people to say all of these things as long as you're not encouraging violence. But
yes.
You didn't even need to do that. But instead of presenting you positively the strength of and the frivolity of what's against you, and then there's another thing is that the London, because this took place in London, not your town, the case. Mm-hmm. In your image, you had the jury as the Londoners of 40 years ago. So you chose trial by jury, knowing that very often a jury of peers is more likely to be on your side than a judge, because the British judges by now are known to be on the Islamic side.
Yes.
Instead, you did not get. You got people who were not from your background, who were told that they might be offended, and also this lawyer was herself an immigrant, and I'm not against immigrants. My parents were immigrants to Canada. I know, I'm not against immigrants whatsoever, but she had a chip on her shoulder about you and your comments.
Yeah, that's very much the case. I mean, I did think that having a jury of my peers would be much better than having a panel of what they call lay magistrates hearing the case. I mean, that was an option for me. I could have had the case heard by a panel of magistrates, but I know that magistrates go through extensive training to make sure they're all up to date with concepts like diversity and political correctness. And I really wasn't keen on that. I was lucky last time in 2014. I had the case heard before a district judge, and he was extremely fair. But I didn't feel I wanted to try my luck with a panel of magistrates down in London. So I opted for trial by jury, as you say, on the basis that a jury trial will generally be slightly more sympathetic to the defendant than a panel of magistrates, and also if they're a jury of your peers, then they'll tend to sympathise with you. But it all went horribly wrong, of course. When the jury was selected, it turned out they were about 75%, quite clearly not true blue Englishmen and women, you might say. I don't want to be prejudicial to any extent, but there were quite a few of them that didn't want to swear in on the Bible. They would the only way they could serve was by taking a non-religious affirmation, and there were quite a lot of them that were obviously from if not the Middle East, then Africa and far-flung parts, and they couldn't really be expected to have the same kind of overall approach to life as say somebody who was born and brought up in England. So I felt that was a disadvantage to me. And the thing was, the defence barrister never challenged any of this, because in a British court, you do have the option to challenge the jury to a certain extent to determine whether they have any built-in bias. Now, that was never done, and that's another reason that we are going to appeal, because there was never any checking done on the potential bias of the jury. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, 3/4 of the jury were of that sort of character. Of the other 3, we lost 2 of them in the first 2 days of the trial through illness.
I have a question, because I heard that from you. Was that true illness, you think, or the people were uncomfortable dealing with the case and fearful or something like that?
Well, I think the first one was genuine illness. What happened on the first day what happened on the second day was that all the remaining 11 jurors managed to get themselves stuck in a lift at the Crown Court for their entire lunch hour, and they had to be freed by a team of firefighters. And one of them had an asthmatic attack because of this, mm-hmm. and she had to go home, and so we were left with 10 jurors. And a judge was debating about whether to stop the trial and restart with a fresh jury. In the end, he decided that they were going to go ahead with 10 jurors. So, I mean, that's another thing that I felt disadvantaged me. Now, I don't know how much weight can be given to that when it comes to grounds for appeal, but I certainly felt that it disadvantaged me. So that was yet another thing. And you're quite right about this barrister. She was not in my corner from the start. Now, what I thought I was getting was somebody from a top-notch chambers, as they call them over here, where you have groups of barristers. They're formed into groups which are called chambers. And this particular set of chambers put up what looked like a very competent barrister right at the start. I spoke to him, but then something happened. He was called away to deal with an extensive case at the Old Bailey, so I couldn't have him. But the second barrister that was assigned to me from the same chambers, I met him, and he seemed absolutely fine. He had my outlook on life, and he looked at the evidence and he says, there's no way they're going to pin a harassment charge on you with the evidence that I'm looking at right now. And that would have been absolutely fine, but about a week before the trial, there was a problem of some sort, and my solicitor said, Lee Harris, this particular barrister, he can't represent you. We've got another barrister from the same chambers with the same amount of experience who will represent you instead. And I thought, what could possibly go wrong? But it turned out she wasn't in my corner at all. She didn't do the things that she ought to have done as a defence barrister to properly challenge the prosecution, to properly challenge things like jury bias.
And it went downhill. Bias. Yeah. And it's people not swearing on the Bible, and I'm totally fine with, do it on the Bhagavad Gita if you like. But the thing is, if what you are being charged with basically is Islamophobia under another name, then it is really important to make sure that people are not pro-Islamic, that they're not going to take or they're definitely not pro-Sharia, that they're anti-Sharia, that they're pro-freedom of speech. Everyone needs to be checked for where do they stand on freedom of speech. And it doesn't matter what their religion is, even if they are British and they believe in not talking about certain things or whatever, however, my accent's no good, then they're obviously out if they think that you should have shut up. So you need to, everybody, but particularly people come from an ideology that is anti-freedom of speech. Have they left it behind? Or do they think that certain things are blasphemy?
Yeah, I mean, we never even looked into that. What we should have done was to ask each juror that question and then decide whether or not they were fit to be selected for this particular trial. And that was never done. And consequently, I was at a disadvantage right at the start. And then my barrister, her very opening statement was, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, some of you may not like Mr. Burton's politics." And I'm like, what? "Some of you," she says, "may not like the things that Mr. Burton has to say." And I thought, I don't believe I'm hearing this. But, the trial had started, and what am I going to do? I can hardly stand up and say, I want to get rid of this barrister, because I think that might just have made things even worse. So she started by prejudicing the jury against me. I mean, that isn't so much grounds for appeal, because a judge would say, well, you should have had a better defence barrister, and I can't argue with that. But nevertheless, it was just another nail in the coffin, if you like, what went down.
Forget about one nail, it's 40.
Yeah. That's right.
And then she also closed with a similar kind of thing about how potentially offensive you were to many people. And she didn't go and say, that's no excuse. We do not take offense. No. We are, as a thing, we are for freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is what counts in this country, and according to the European. So she didn't. Yeah. No. Okay. One can fault you. You took it for granted that this person was going to be similar to the one who had just stepped off and who was just wonderful. Yeah. Okay. Yes. One can fault you, but on the other hand, one could fault her. I fault her. And right now, what I want a successful appeal for you. And for that, I'm going to switch the conversation right now, because I want people to know more about you.
Okay.
You have been on the alert about Islam, but I want to go back even further. Could I have a minute or two on you as a boy, like this little boy with a sense of humor? What were you like? Did you care about justice as a child? Would anyone have indicated that little kid with his sense of humor, he's going to be a human writer?
I don't think anybody would have said that when I was a little lad. I mean, I was a bit of a tearaway. Nothing criminal, nothing malicious, nothing bad. But I did have a quirky sense of humour that a lot of people remarked on. I mean, I spoke not many years ago to some people who I used to know at school. There was this website called Friends Reunited. You may have heard of it. And I got together with some friends that I used to know at school, and they always said to me, "Oh, we remember you for your sense of humour," which is always so different from everybody else. And I mean, it seemed quite normal to me, but they remarked on it. But I never thought that I would actually be employing my skills in public speaking or writing articles and that. I was relatively introverted, I think, and although I went through school and university and got a job in engineering and geology, I was never thought of myself as being a fluent speaker or a fluent writer to any extent, and that really has only happened in the past few years, I think, since I've been pursuing the cause of counter-jihad.
How did that happen? Because each person has to go there on their own. It's not like we're brought up to be alert to Islam or to know Islamic ideology, etc. So how did it happen? And what have you done?
You're quite right. I mean, before September the 11th, 2001, I mean, I thought, like most other people did, that Islam was just another religion. I hadn't taken much notice of it. I mean, I knew that Muslims prayed to Mecca, and that was about all I did know. And I had a computer consultancy business, and at one time I actually employed some people, a couple of whom were Muslims, and I never really had a problem with them at all, certainly not on account of Islam. But after 2001, I started to think, well, what is it that could inspire people to do such a terrible thing. Because I actually watched events unfold live on TV on September the 11th. And I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And the images stayed with me. Well, they've stayed with me ever since. But it inspired me to try and find out what it was that inspired what it was that was behind a group of people doing such a terrible thing. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the guiding ideology behind what they did was Islam. When everybody else was saying, no, Islam is a religion of peace, George Bush himself stood up the day after 9/11 and said Islam is a religion of peace in public. And when the President of the United States says that so soon after such a terrible event, people think, well, maybe he knows more than everybody else does. Maybe we should just take that for granted. But the more I looked into it, the more I found it was the exact opposite. And I started to research books and articles. I came across some of Robert Spencer's books, and I read them. And the more I read them, the more I thought, well, what people like Robert Spencer are writing actually fits the facts. And what people like politicians and people like President Bush were saying, that doesn't concord with the facts at all. And I thought, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe I haven't researched enough. And the more I'll research, the more I'll find that, in fact, my initial findings were incorrect. But that never turned out to be the case. It just reinforced everything I read, reinforced the impression that Islam was not what Muslims were telling us it was. And so consequently, I became convinced that Islam was not something that should be regarded as just another religion. In fact, it doesn't fall into the category of religion at all. Primarily, I would argue, and many other people argue, that it is a political ideology. And although it has religious aspects to it, it should not be treated as a religion on a par with Judaism and Christianity and other world religions. And if there was one reason, if somebody asked me for one reason why I would take that view, I would say because of the Golden Rule. Now, many of your viewers and listeners will know about the Golden Rule, but for those who don't, it's been used for thousands of years to tell the difference between a political ideology and a religion. Basically, the Golden Rule is do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. And all religions follow the Golden Rule, and that's how you know they're religions. But Islam does not follow the Golden Rule. Islam divides the world into two, and it pits Muslims against non-Muslims, and the Quran and the Islamic texts basically instruct Muslims that they are to wage eternal warfare against non-Muslims until the day of resurrection, basically forever. Now, that is not the Golden Rule, and consequently to classify Islam as a religion and to give it the same religious privileges, in my view, is a huge, huge mistake, and something that we're going to need to address sooner rather than later.
How long have you gone from caring and reading to speaking out? How did that happen?
Well, I think it all started about 4 or 5 years ago when I was talking to a chap called Jared Winter. Now he was running a radio show, and I'd been speaking to one of my online colleagues, and I was saying I would really like to get out and about a little bit more and to explain to people what I see as being a big problem. And he says, well, why don't you try Blog Talk Radio? And I said, what's that? And he says, well, it's a platform where people can get to espouse their views, and they can do it in an interactive way. People can call into the show, you can talk to them. And I said, well, that sounds absolutely fine. I'd like to start small. I didn't want to go on to BBC Panorama or anything like that, Fox News or anything like that. I was just happy to start small because I wasn't a public speaker at that time. As I said, when I was growing up, was really quite introverted, and so I was introduced to Jared Winter. We had a couple of hours chat on his show, and one or two people got in touch afterwards, in particular Kel Fritzy of Red Fox Radio, and said, you must absolutely get your voice out in more places. And I was invited by Kel Fritzy of Red Fox Radio to actually go onto her show, and I've been on her show as a panelist and a co-host for quite a while. So that has given me a little bit more fluency, I think, when it comes to public speaking. And in the meantime, I was developing my writing skills and writing articles for people like the New English Review, Broadside News, the Brenner Brief, Liberty GB, various other publications, and my articles were being picked up by people like Gates of Vienna and Jihad Watch and so on. So I knew I was onto something, but I didn't realise that it would get so close in terms of court cases and an eventual conviction for religiously aggravated harassment. I never thought that would. I never saw it coming, shall we say?
Especially for a joke, a prank, like really, because if you hadn't put that last thing about it, that you really don't want me, or if you had said anything except the takia part, which was the religious part, because the other part was not religious. Yeah, it's like you've also become involved with a political party to some extent, because you mentioned Liberty GB. How did you go from just I'm talking to I like this political party, or I want to be involved with some political party, Paul Weston's party?
Well, what I noticed after 9/11 was that there wasn't any group who was prepared to say anything really about Islam at all. It was just not on the radar of any political party in the UK for a long time. So when I came across Liberty GB, who was specifically looking to bring out into the public domain the various problems that Islam is causing, and to come up with constructive suggestions on how to deal with those problems, it seemed like the perfect place to go. So I got in touch with Liberty GB and said, you know, I'm hosting a radio program. Can I help Liberty GB in some way? And they said, well, how would you like to host a radio program for us? And I said, yeah, I would do that. So for a while, I was the host of the Liberty GB radio on Blog Talk Radio. Now that ran for about 18 months until the general election of 2015. After that, the Liberty GB decided they were going to regroup and reallocate their resources, and so they said, well, we're not going to carry on with the radio program for the time being, but we would like you to step up and become part of our executive council, because you've developed this fluency and knowledge of Islam, and you're, you know, generally a nice guy with a reasonable sense of humour that comes across well. And I thought, well, thank you very much. And so I joined them as a member of the executive council.
Congratulations. I think that you fit very well. And again, they noted your humor, which is one of the things that many people have noted about the British. Plus you have, even like in theatre, like the humor is just so much part of the British tradition. And so there you are with Liberty GB, and you accidentally run afoul of Tell Mama, get off, and then you prankishly put in a job application. And I cannot believe the series of bad lucks, like especially that lawyer, that jury, mixed together that lawyer and that jury, it's toxic. And then here you are facing, needing to appeal. Is there anything you'd like to say to people?
Well, I mean, you talk about bad luck. I think right at the start, when I wrote my initial job application to Tell Mama, I certainly didn't expect it to be taken seriously. I certainly didn't expect Fiaz Magal to phone me up and say, "Ha, Tim, you are a wag. We love your sense of humour. You must come down for a job interview." I didn't expect that to happen. And of course, it didn't happen. I got a message back from Tell Mama to say, we're reporting your message to the police and handing it over to our solicitors, which I thought was a bit over the top. And quite honestly, if they hadn't have done that, I probably would have left it there with that first email and not done anything else. But because they came back in such a pompous and arrogant and high-handed way, I felt I had to respond. That was a mistake. I shouldn't really have responded. I should have just let it drop. But when it came to court, I mean, what happened was about 6 weeks after the emails that I sent back in April last year, I was contacted by the police, and they said, we would like you to come in for a chat. So I went into the local police station, had a chat with them, all recorded on tape under caution for about an hour and a half. And basically I said, all I'm doing is exercising my right to free speech. I don't think I'm doing it in a way that is threatening or intimidating or likely to cause distress or alarm, because that's what they were angling for. They said, well, we think this might constitute harassment. And I said, well, I don't see how, because I'd looked at what was required for harassment back in 2014 when I was charged with it under very similar circumstances, and you have to have an element of distress or alarm or intimidation or threatening behaviour or something along those lines before it can be constituted as harassment. And not only that, but I'd written an essay sometime previously to talk about harassment. And in my view, harassment is when you get into somebody's face and they can't easily walk away from it or push you away or get out of where they happen to be without some sort of penalty. You know, they might lose face. There might be some financial penalty. There might be some psychological penalty. If they can't get out of it and you're still in their face, well, that is harassment. But of course, on social media and any form of electronic communications, the manufacturers of those platforms have very thoughtfully provided a button to block, a bit of software to block the sender. So if you don't like what somebody is saying for any reason at all, you can just block them, and that will be the end of it. And I pointed this out to Tel Mama and Fiaz Magal. I said, if you don't want me to, if you don't want to read my email messages, then that's all you have to do. And I elaborated on that for the duration of one email, because I felt they were technically illiterate. And I said I would normally charge, £500 for this information, but as it's you and as I'm feeling benevolent, I will waive my normal fee. But that didn't go down very well. They went and complained to the police that I was harassing them. But I thought it was so crazy when they could have blocked me if they didn't like what I was saying, and if it was causing them distress, they could have blocked me at any stage. But of course, they had an agenda, and the agenda was to get examples of people causing trouble to Muslims or displaying Islamophobia in some way, so that they could add them to their database and justify their enormous public grant. And it was a bit naive of me to think that they would actually shut down the communications in order to stop me sending emails to them. They wanted those emails, they needed those emails, and we brought them.
Just one little aside, I bet they also had it in for you.
Oh yeah, they certainly
somebody
did.
else they might have blocked. No, they would have used it, but you, who had won a case against them, would have had the case dismissed. Oh my God.
Yes. Well, I mean, in the 2014 case, I made this very point that if they wanted to, they could have blocked my tweets, because at that time in 2014, I'd sent them some tweets on Twitter. And the judge agreed in 2014. He said, if Mr. Burton had gone up to Mr. Mughals' house at midnight and shouted things through his letterbox, that would be different. But on social media, where you can easily block communications, harassment was not applicable. And given that there's all these free speech considerations as well, Mr. Burton, I'm finding you not guilty and you are a free man. And that was in 2014. And I fully expected that this argument would prevail in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, there were so many things. There was the jury, there was the judges summing up, there was the defence not properly testing the jury, not properly handling the arguments that were put forward in court, and blackening my character in front of the court for everybody to see. Now, I hadn't anticipated that, I have to say, and it all went against me in the end.
It definitely did. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the little that I can do, or the whatever that I can do, which is to send your message out to as many people as possible, and to call that people help you in the way that you most need. If somebody is a top lawyer and willing to work for free for you, you are there. That's fine. But what most people can do, what far more people can do, what over 1,000 people did worldwide for Tommy Robinson when he was looking at prison again, over 1,000 people worldwide from 37 countries gave to him to keep him out of jail. I'm hoping that, well, maybe not 1,000, maybe it'll only be 500, but you need much less than he needed, because he really needed a huge chunk to defend him, like 4 times as much as you need. So yeah. I'm going to end with an appeal that people take you into consideration and give to you. I will also keep people updated. That's the other thing. What's happening with the appeal? What is the sentence? Is it a week in jail? But you are facing potentially 2 years in jail.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, the judge actually said, his very words were, he says, "I would not like Mr. Burton to be under the impression that I'm considering anything other than a custodial sentence," as were his very words. So I rather think that they want to make an example of me, because they don't want the establishment in this country does not want people like me speaking out against Islam. They want Islam to be presented as this wonderful, wonderful religion that nobody should say anything against. And if Muslims do something terrible in the name of Islam, which happens pretty much every week, they do not want Islam to be pointed at as the driving ideology, but behind what Muslims do. And I'm spoiling that picture for them. I'm saying the problem is Islam. The problem, during the court case in 2017, Fiaz Magal said, and he said it on video, he wouldn't come to the court. He had to have a video link because he was too afraid of me and he was too afraid of my supporters. I mean, if you looked at my supporters, you'd think, well, that's absolutely crazy, because they're all the same age as me. There was a chap that came in on crutches. There were 3 or 4 of them that looked like, they were going to need an ambulance to take them away at the end of the trial. It was just crazy, but he appeared on video. And what he said was, Mr. Burton is not making any distinction between Islamists and Muslims, and he wants that distinction to be there so that he can say, well, 99% of Muslims are absolutely fine, and there's only this tiny minority of Islamists who pervert the great religion of Islam. That is a false picture. And Muslims themselves don't look at it like that. President Erdogan, for example, of Turkey, had hit the nail on the head, in my view, when he said not so long ago that Islam is Islam and that's it. All this talk about distinguishing between fundamentalist Islam and radical Islam and extremist Islam, he says it's all rubbish. He says Islam is Islam and that's it. So the texts and the ideology is very clear. Muslims are commanded to fight against non-Muslims until Allah's religion reigns supreme throughout the world. Now that is in black and white all through the Islamic texts, like a stick of rock, as we say over here. I don't know if you have sticks of rock in Canada, but it's like... Okay, well, a stick of rock is like a sweet stick of candy with letters printed all the way through it. So when you say something has written through it like a stick of rock, that's what it's referring to. And Islam has this doctrine of eternal warfare against non-Muslims running through it like a stick of rock. And if it's clear as day for anybody who takes the trouble to read the text and to look at the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah, it's there in black and white. But of course, it takes effort and time to do that,
and courage.
And courage,
Because
and
what
perseverance.
I see is anyone who looks, in fact, anyone who spends 10 minutes reading Surah 9, it's not going to take more than 10 minutes to read that, will know exactly that. They won't know it with your depth, but it's there. So what I see is all these people who are on the other side, it has to be something else. They must, on some level, know exactly what you know. Because everyone who goes to the Quran finds out what you have found out. And you don't have to read the Quran, you just need to read Surah 9, the last will and testament, or as it's known, because it's not formally called that. So these people are into their own destruction, into the destruction of the freedoms that they claim to be espousing. To say nothing but a custodial sentence is being considered for putting in a job application with a joke at the end of it.
Yes.
This person must have heard the same things about Islam that you have heard. It's not possible that they never were exposed to this information. They know how to learn. Therefore, the Quran, which is less than 300 pages, 200 and something, anyone who's got a law degree like this judge must certainly be able to read 200 pages. This is one of the things that gets me more than anything, the way it's the people in our society who are not having the guts, the courage, the sanity, all of these things to see what you are so clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why that is to a certain extent, because the first judge or politician to put his head above the parapet and say that Islam is not the religion of peace that Muslims say it is, and we need to be doing something about it, is likely to find his career coming to a grinding halt. And there aren't many, if any, politicians or judges or senior establishment figures who are willing to risk their career when it's far easier to kick the issue into the long grass and to have it as a problem for our children and grandchildren.
It's not such a problem. It's a death sentence for your children and grandchildren, because it's not just a problem, it's currently a problem.
Yeah.
And politicians who have stood up, like Geert Wilders and Marine Le Pen, and to a minor way, Trump, are having a following because so many people do see what you are seeing. So I don't know if politicians would all be kicked out. I don't know if there is somebody in Britain with the fire of Geert Wilders.
Well, I have to say I have a lot of time for Paul Weston, the founder of Liberty GB.
Yes.
He's really quite a firebrand. He's put various videos out on YouTube. If you haven't seen any of Paul Weston's videos on YouTube, well, I mean, I was just going to say for your listeners,
everybody, yes,
please go to YouTube and take a look, because he's an impressive speaker and he says things in the way that they should be said. So, I mean, that was another reason that I was so attracted to Liberty GB, because I found Paul Weston to be very charismatic, and I thought this is the guy who should be who is saying what all the politicians in our country ought to be saying, that there's a problem. I know I'm referring to it as a problem. It's much more than a problem. It's a complete catastrophe that we have allowed Islam to get the foothold in our Western societies that we have. But we are where we are, and now we have to decide what we're going to do about it. Are we going to just roll over and let Islam steamroller all over us, or are we going to fight back and stand up and say, no, this is not what our ancestors and our forefathers fought for? They fought for the freedoms which were handed down to us, and we have to defend those freedoms. Those freedoms are not going to defend themselves. We have to take that forward and defend those freedoms for our children and grandchildren. And when I say our freedoms aren't going to defend ourselves, a lot of people think they look at our civilization and what they see is a strong fortress which is quite strong enough to withstand the battering of pretty much anything that it runs up against it. But that's not really the case at all. Our civilization is actually quite fragile, and unless it's nurtured and the concepts of freedom and democracy are nurtured, and all the other things that make up our civilization are protected, then the barbarians at the gate, if they're allowed in, will find it very easy to destroy it from the inside, and that is currently what is happening. And we have to stand up and say, no, we believe that the values that we have in our democracy with freedom and tolerance, they should be defended and above everything else, because unless you've got freedom of speech, unless you've got true freedom of religion, freedom of expression, none of your other freedoms are going to get you anywhere at all. I mean, I have freedom to go out of my front door at the moment, go down to the shop and buy food or a pint of milk, but that's a minor freedom compared to my freedom of speech, which is currently being tested to its limit by the court system. They want to take away the ability of people like me to speak out against the evil of Islam, and it is an evil. If you look at what people might say, oh, you can't describe a religion followed by 1.5 billion people as evil. Well, I beg to differ, because we have a notion in Judeo-Christian civilization as to what is good, and the opposite of what is good is evil. And the values that Islam espouses are the complete opposite of the values that we hold dear in our civilization. So to use the word evil is actually a perfectly valid and reasonable response to the threat of Islam that we have. But of course, a lot of people out there are susceptible to simple and glib answers that the political left have. And if the political left says, oh, don't listen to Tim Burton because he's a racist, bigoted, Islamophobe, right-wing extremist, a lot of people will say, oh, all right then, and they won't think about it anymore. And I think that's a huge mistake, because they will come to regret that in a few short years when they find that all along Islam is not the wonderful religion of peace they've been told it is, but by then it will be too late. So we have to stand up and do something now.
I agree. And in terms of evil, I just say one needs to define. For example, I am not really pleased with the fact that according to Islam, most of the denizens of hell are women. I think it's evil to think. Now, of course, according to them, it's just accurate. Just women are just disobedient, and therefore we deserve to be tortured forever. Well, I think that kind of disqualifies the religion for me, if that's and women are not equal. Women's word is half a man's, and in rape cases a quarter. On top of that, there is the call to kill or convert all of us, and it's Surah 9. I'm just going, okay, now please define if these things are not evil, if the call to kill you and defeat you are not evil, if you think that they're just unpleasant, perhaps. But then I'm against unpleasantness.
Well, this is where you come back to the concept of the golden rule,
yes.
which is what's used by all religions in the world. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. As you say, the dictates of Sharia law are that Muslim men are right at the top of the tree. Then you've got Muslim women on a second level. Then you've got non-Muslims at a level below that, non-Muslim women at a level below that, gays, homosexuals and so on are right at the bottom of the pecking order. And that is not following the golden rule. When you say do unto others as you would have done unto you, you can see that having a pecking order like that is mandated by Sharia is the complete antithesis of what a religion should be. And so it's not difficult from a philosophical point of view to argue that Islam should not have a place at the table with other religions, and it should not have religious privileges that it's currently being granted. It should be looked on as being more akin to communism or fascism or Nazism, because it has a lot in common, particularly with Nazism. It has a great deal in common with Nazism rather than Judaism, Christianity, or any of the other great world religions. And we will eventually have to address this, and it's going to cause a lot of people a lot of angst, because they'll be thinking in the back of their minds, well, I've grown up with the being told at every stage that Islam is a religion of peace, and now you're telling me it isn't. It's something that's going to affect their worldview drastically, and a lot of people resist having their worldview changed. And we are going to have an uphill struggle, but it's a struggle that has to be fought, as we were saying earlier, for our children and grandchildren.
And right now, the little bit of fight that people need to do is to help protect Tim Burton. So I want to thank you very much for coming on and speaking with me, and for all you have done and all you are doing. That is amazing. That it is so natural. And I think those of us who speak out, it is natural for us to speak out because we know something to be true. We explore, and we're just trying to really uphold our values: freedom of speech, freedom of thought, equality between men and women, gay rights. We're trying to uphold these things. So it's so natural at that point that something that wants to attack it is just naturally something that we have to stand up against, despite the fact that it's much easier to be afraid, like many people are afraid. But before we go on again, I'm just going to say thank you so much. If you have any final 5 words, okay, otherwise.
Well, only to say that if you would like to help by donating, we have a big blue button on the Liberty GB website. You can donate through that. You can also donate through PayPal, paypal.me/follow the cat. And I obviously appreciate everything you're doing for me, Elsa. It's been a tremendous pleasure talking with you this morning, and I hope to speak to you and to your viewers and listeners again very soon.
I'm really glad to be able to help, a little whatever I can do to help. So thank you on both sides, and then for now, goodbye. But you're right, we will be connecting again.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.